Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to a new mini-series where we're going to be discussing some of the strategies and some of the tactics of how to conduct yourself in a debate, or what a debate is in the first place, and how we can be effective in that regard. We're also joined by our esteemed Sapiens team in the back here, which are also going to be part of these sessions, very important sessions. And we're going to be making this interactive as well. But one thing I want to start off by saying, actually I think the best thing to do is to define what a debate is. And I like Aristotle's definition. He wrote this in a book called Topics, in a bigger book called the Organon. And within that big book called the Organon, he had it divided into 6 different subtopics. One of them was topics, and then he spoke about debates. And he says debate is the practical art of persuasion in public contexts. It relies on logos, or logical argumentation, ethos, character credibility, and pathos, or appeal to emotion. And these were the 3 things that he thought were very, very important to debate. But before we continue as Muslims, I think it's also important for us to read something about the dangers of debating. Of course, there are many dangers of debating, but this is a particularly important thing that I came across from Imam al-Ghazali. He says that, basically, look, I'm going to say it in Arabic and then I'm going to translate it into English. He goes, علم وتحقق أن المناظرة الموضوعة لقصد الغلبة والإفحام وإظهار الفضل والشرف والتشدق عند الناس وقصد المباهاة والمماراة. So he's basically saying here actually there is a translation here I've got here. It says, know and realize that debating for the sake of overcoming and defeating one's opponent, or to manifest one's own excellence and nobility, or to boast in front of people, or to intend to brag and win in people's approval, are the sources of the most blameworthy qualities according to Allah, and the most praiseworthy according to Allah's enemy, Iblis. Now, this is an important reminder because, to me, first and foremost, let's be honest, that debating, if we're going to make debating into ibadah, okay, because the Qur'an does mention وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. It mentions jidal, it mentions idea of debating. If it's now an act of worship that you're trying to establish the religion of Allah with it as a tool, which I think is a very legitimate way, and the Quran mentions it, no one can say it's haram. It's actually a command in the Quran. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Jidal means argumentation, okay? It's a form of debate. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ أَكْثَرَ شَيْءٍ جَدَلًا. In Surah Al-Kahf, Allah says that the human being is most argumentative creature. So clearly the word jidal means debate or argument, and Allah says وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, clearly saying there is a use of this debate. Some people have a very pessimistic view in the Muslim community, say debates don't work and this and that. Whether you think it works or not, it's in the Qur'an. It's something the prophets did do. Abraham did that. There's no question about, وَحَاجُّهُ قَوْمُهُ. His people debated him, and وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتَيْنَاهَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ عَلَى قَوْمِهِ نَرْفَعُ دَرَجَاتٍ مَنْ نَشَاءُ. These are the arguments that we emboldened Abraham with, and we increase in ranks whomever we want. So clearly, the idea of arguments, using rational argumentation, and using debate is something in Islam. So if it's something that you're going to consider to be an act of worship, then the spiritual aspects of anything that is an act of worship needs to be now considered. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. As the Prophet ﷺ told us, that certainly actions are based on intentions. And so if the first thing you must want the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning you're doing this just in the same way as you're praying. When you're by yourself in the house and you're praying, you do wudu and the sink or whatever, then you go and you pray in your house. The same level of sincerity that you exhibit in that action has to be the same level of sincerity that you will exhibit in a debate capacity if you're indeed doing it as an act of worship. Now, you can debate trivial topics and non-religious topics as a non-act of worship. And Ghazali's maqula here, what he said, doesn't really apply because riya only applies, if you like, to acts of worship. If two young men are talking about who's a greater football player, Messi or Ronaldo, and they're both coming back and forth in excellent debates, maybe that will be one of our topics today, because I know some people are really interested in football here, and or some other issue like that, you know. Then what the Ghazali mentioned and riya and all these spiritual ailments and problems is not necessarily applicable here. So let's dive straight into it. We talked about what debate is. We said really it's about persuading people in a public area. We spoke about what Aristotle said it consists of, and who remembers the definition? He said three things, Aristotle.
Pathos.
Yeah, okay, very good. What is that?
Appealing to emotion or something. Or
okay.
Something to do with emotions.
So what emotion was definitely one of them. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah.
Logo, no?
Yeah.
The logic.
Okay, so there's a logical aspect of it, and there's one more aspect.
Ethos.
Which is what now?
Remind me what was that?
It's more to do with the credibility of the person. Now, obviously, after I got a thrashing in court a couple of times, I think the next debate I do will be that one's going to take a bit of a hit. But yeah, that's why it is important. You cannot really separate. Okay, you cannot separate the person, the debater, from the debate itself, as much as you wish you could. I mean, I wish I could, so I can be absolved of any self-accountability, that I don't have to uphold impeccable virtue. But the truth is, you as a person and your character and how you hold yourself as an individual, what you're known for, you know, and like the extreme examples of an individual who's, for example, a murderer, and he's preaching about peace. It's almost laughable. You see it now with like Netanyahu or something. It's like, you know what I mean? It's absolutely laughable. Or somebody who's, let's just say, morbidly obese, and he's giving you a health lesson. Like he says, okay, we're going to talk about the dangers of cholesterol and the dangers of, but the guy's 250 kilos or something, and he's on a wheelchair, and these are the dangers. Unless he's going to come from an angle where he's saying, look what it's done to me. You know, look how it's destroyed my life. You don't want to be like me. But unless he comes out, then obviously the credibility of the individual. I'll be honest, like this is the case. Like if you go to a gym and people are lifting weights, and someone's giving you a bit of advice as you're curling the dumbbell, you take a look. The first thing you do, whether you like it or not, unconsciously, is you look at their body. See, let's see if this guy has achieved what he's talking about. Right? Or if someone's giving you financial advice and he's living in a council property and he's got like going to the job seekers allowance. You know, this guy's come out of the job seekers to give me a financial advice about how to be a great businessman, and so on and so forth. So it can become laughable. And that's why it is important not to separate, you know, the person's reputation from the thing in question. But the way I like to do it, in terms of like the basics of what a debate really is, and I'm going to come up here to the whiteboard to explain this in some detail here, is that really it's very important if you're having a debate, right? There are three important pillars, according to me. Okay, now we spoke about Ghazali and Aristotle. Now we have to speak about me, right? According to me, okay, you've got arguments. Okay. Then that's number one. Okay. Number two is you have strategies. And number three, you have tactics. Now, you might look at number 2 and 3 and say, well, they look quite similar. We'll come to that in a second. But arguments can be different types. For example, you can have deductive arguments. We've kind of covered this before in logic and stuff. You can have inductive arguments. All right? You can have abductive arguments. You can have eliminative arguments. You can have probabilistic arguments. You can have You can even have emotional arguments. And by the way, someone could say, what are you talking about here? You're being very emotional, it's an emotional argument. There's nothing wrong with an emotional argument, so long as it's not against logic. Some of the most powerful arguments in the world are actually emotional arguments. So long as they don't contravene logical principles, actually these probably are the most important ones, really, for politicians and people who want to make a change in society. So you can have different types of arguments, okay? And the arguments you use depends on your audience. I mean, everything depends on one, audience, and two, context. And we'll cover the context. But for me, the general rule with arguments is less is more. Okay, less is more. If you have 3 strong arguments, it's better than having 30 mediocre ones. Even if you have just one strong argument. Okay. Now, obviously, all of this depends on what time you're given, who your opponent is, who the audience is. But I believe less is more. Because, okay, let me ask you guys. Why do you think having less arguments is more advantageous?
Give something for them to focus on.
Okay, so focus. But think about it from you like football, you like sports, think about it from a football perspective or sports perspective, right? The more you do, the more you can get what?
Wrong.
Huh?
Wrong.
You can get attacked. So how would you put that in a strategic term?
You expose yourself.
Yeah, so you expose, the more you say, the more you can get countered. Okay? Do you see what I mean? Yeah. So if you make one strong argument, then there's less of a counter. Okay? If you make 2 or 3 strong arguments, so the more you say, okay, the less it's going to hit the target, and the more you become vulnerable to a counterattack. That's just basic, and by the way, it's a principle in life. It's not just in debates. This is in every single thing you ever do.
Is that, you risking overwhelming your audience as well?
Exactly.
Because if you focus on one particular argument, you can really hammer that down in one.
Yes, yes. Because people, especially nowadays, they need repetition. Look, the Qur'an repeats itself many, many times, but in different formulations, in different articulations, in different phraseology. We really need to start looking at the Qur'an as not just a book of guidance, which it is, but as a rhetorical book. Because the rhetoric in the Qur'an, there's a reason why Allah uses repetition, 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 repetition. Do you not see? Do you not hear? Do you not this and that? Because it's better to hammer 1 or 2 points than 1,000 points. Or 2,000 points, 10,000 points. No one's going to remember it. And of course, that depends on the time that somebody has and the audience and the context. So, less is more. Now, let's get to this bit here. Strategy and tactics. What do you reckon the difference between the two things are? What is a strategy? And by the way, you can use whatever, sports, military, because we hear now military strategy, right? What is a strategy?
Is it like what you're going to do and how you're going to do?
Okay, so what you're going to do?
You come prepared for the debate from before you started. You just prepare yourself. What points I'm going to make?
Yeah.
How should I conduct myself? And
Okay, so what points you're going to make is more kind of arguments, right? That's more arguments. What's the difference? Strategy, what you said, the second part of what you said is, how am I going to do things? Think more about this.
Is it an objective? I need to get to this point and get a particular thing articulated.
Yeah. So it's a general way of achieving something, okay? It's a general way of achieving something. Okay. Sorry about the handwriting. I can't be bothered to make it better. It's a general. So then, if that's a general way, what's a tactic?
It's the specific
It's
ways.
the specific ways in which you implement your strategy. Okay? Specific ways. All right, so let me give an example. Name a sport. Give me a sport that you like.
MMA.
Okay, well, so now you're making it easy for me, right? You've got an expert on the field now. So in any kind of fight sports, let me give an example, right? Floyd Mayweather. We don't like him for his political views, but you cannot deny that he's good at boxing, okay? He was a great defensive boxer, okay? You have to admit that, okay? We all have to admit it. And what was his strategy? It wasn't defense, it was something a little bit more sophisticated than that. We've already mentioned it today. Counter-punch. He was a counter-puncher. And he was probably the best we've probably ever seen, unfortunately, for his political views. One of, at least, best counter-punchers in boxing history, okay? So he would, it doesn't mean he's not initiating anything. He would initiate jabs and stuff, but if you look at, for example, his fight with Canelo, yeah? He fought Canelo Alvarez. He had a completely different strategy to Terence Crawford. Crawford was more attacking, front foot, back foot, going. He had a different strategy. Mayweather was waiting for him to do something. And he knew, if then. If he hits me with the right hand, I'll hit him with the left hook. If he hits me with the left hook, then I'll hit him with the right hand. If he goes up, I'll go down. If he goes down, I'll go up. If he comes here, I'll block like this. He had his own Philly shell, his own. So he had his own strategy, but the counter strategy was the main thing to do. He was going to counter. That's what he was going to do. He was going to counter. And this can work in debates as well. And now, since we're being open, this is the strategy that I employed with Piers Morgan. Now, why did I do that? I had this in my head, right? This whole structure. Because I thought, okay, the time and the constraints and all this kind of stuff, I can't really initiate too much. So I have to be really good at countering him. And if I'm honest with you, the way I decided to do it is that, how am I going to counter him? Because this is the question I asked myself before I went on to the show. How am I going to counter him to make it look aesthetically as if I am in control? Do you see this question here? Because part of the debate, and we'll come to it, is a performance. So you have to look like you're in control of it. How would someone who's like not familiar with the topic go on this and see this debate and say, okay, this guy is controlling this guy? Well, if I'm being asked questions like I'm in an interrogation room and I'm trying to answer the questions, that's not in control. The way I thought about it was ask him questions. That's how I thought about it. He's asking me questions. Ask him questions. Now, he could have at any point said, this is my show. I asked the questions and established that, okay? But because he has, and this will come to this, and I think all of this is not as important as this next segment, which we're going to cover, the psychological aspect. You have to be able to read your opponent. Now, the greatest debaters, the greatest interrogators, the greatest salespeople, the greatest husbands. Yeah, I don't know why I said that and paused, but that's not one of them. But it's the ones that you have farasa, this idea. And there is a hadith, by the way, subhanAllah, there is a hadith. Ibn al-Qayyim mentions it in his book as a sahih hadith, but some other hadithin, even though Ibn al-Qayyim wasn't really a muhaddith, but say that it's a weak hadith, but nevertheless, the meaning is very interesting. Hadith is, ittaqu farasat al-mu'min. Beware of the mu'min's ability, the believer's ability to read another person. So this is talking about a psychological thing. Basically the emotional intelligence. Okay, and we'll come to that as well, because some people deny such a thing as emotional intelligence. But the strategy that was employed is, okay, how do I do it? Counter attack, and I'm always going to finish with a question. Always finish with a question. And with him, because he was jamming people, I said, forget it. I'm not just going to finish with one question. I'm going to ask him the same question over and over and over again. I'm going to do to him what he does to other people, basically. So that's why if you go back, you'll see I asked him the same question 8 times. So why? But why? But then performative, why? But why is it? So why? Because it makes it look like, okay, who's in charge here? That's the question. Someone that's going to watch is going to ask. Now some people will disapprove and say it's arrogant performance and whatever. It is what it is. I'm just giving you can look, and I'll tell you this again. Debate is not a science. It's more of an art form, okay? It really is. I tried to do acting before, as you know. I wasn't the best. I was actually well below average. And I could see the difference between me and the other actors, because they had been practicing this skill set. But debate is a completely different skill set. And the only way you're going to improve in it is, number one, knowing this, of the theoretical aspects of it. Oh, you have to get the arguments right. You have to get, the logic and all that stuff. But is if you have to do it and have deliberative practice, and we'll come to that. So, number one, arguments. We talked about the arguments here. Number two, strategy, and it's a general way of achieving. And then tactics here, for example, in the boxing context, what would be a tactic? A feint. That's not a strategy. A feint is not a strategy. So a feint is when they're boxing and stuff, and he pretends he's going to throw a punch. Because what it does, it overloads the nervous system of the opponent. And by the way, this works really well. Like, it's surprisingly well how, I spoke to Roy Jones Jr., and he kept talking about feints, and he said, I saw some I don't know what animal it was, or some chickens fighting each other. He said some chickens fighting each other, and they were doing a lot of feints, or roosters, or whatever it may be. And he said, then I realized I took that information. This is what he said, and this was one of the greatest boxers of all time. He went into the ring, he started trying to do the same thing, and it does work, because anxiety is one of the driving emotions of the human being. Allah tells us that in the Qur'an. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ هَلُوعًا. The human being has been created in a state of anxiety. So when you accentuate the anxiety of an individual, okay, you overload their nervous system, moving around, you're not doing anything. If you just start doing that, you're not fighting anyone, but you just start doing that, the guy's going to start, do you know what I mean? Start panicking, yeah. They even do this stuff now in the dating world. And I have a whole course for that. No, I'm only kidding. But no, it's true. And, I made a couple of videos, and because I was watching the videos, and some woman was talking about the mind games that the woman plays against the man, so she get him to be hooked on her, manipulate and all this kind. The point is that you always have to be able to read this stuff. Number one, read it and implement it where necessary, okay? In an ethical and Islamic way. Of course, I'm not talking about the dating, I'm talking about the debates, just in case anyone's going to pick this out of context.
Could you say that by attacking, your opponent doesn't have time to attack? He's always going to be busy defending himself. So you're kind of becoming overbearing on him. You're going to overwhelm him.
Sometimes it depends on your style. Like, there's no, if, let's say, put it in a boxing context. If you're Mike Tyson, it will work. But if you're Floyd Mayweather, it won't work. Do you know what I mean? So the style of the debater depends on the skill set of the debater. If that would work really well on a forceful person against an arrogant opponent. But if it's a person who's, like, for example, if I tried it with someone who's civil and it would just look like arrogance or bullying. So the optics of it is very, very important. Okay. But these are the three things. So, like, let's say, for example, you have a debate, right? Make it a non-Islamic debate. And let's say Messi versus Cristiano Ronaldo. Who's the greatest of all time? I say Cristiano Ronaldo's not even in the top 5. Sorry to say, whatever. I don't know much about football. I'm just making it look like I know what I'm talking about. I had a debate with an individual about this, even though I don't know much about football. And so I say, what's my strongest arguments? Okay, well, Messi won the World Cup. Ronaldo did not win the World Cup. That much I know. Messi's ability to control the midfield is much better. Whatever. Yeah, I don't know much about it. 2-3 strong arguments. Yeah, I come and I say, he's won this much, what's it called? Ballon d'Or. It's called Ballon d'Or. He's had way more Ballon d'Ors than Ronaldo. Maybe he's had the same. I can't remember. You should know.
He has more. Yeah, Messi has more.
He's had more. So he's got the Ballon d'Ors. So statistically, he's got Ballon d'Ors. This, that. He's got the World Cup. He's won how many, what's it called? La Liga. How many La Ligas has he won compared to Ronaldo's whatever? It's not even comparable. And he was in a more staunch league, and he was part of the... Oh, you could argue. Well,
Ronaldo's played in more leagues.
Ronaldo's played in more leagues?
Yes.
That's one of the arguments on the other side. And I'll say, look, so that's the argument. Someone says, no, actually, statistically, though, Ronaldo has scored more goals. Okay, I'm just making an argument. I don't know if it's true. Is it true? So, yeah, he's scored more goals. But the assumption here, once again, I'm just giving you something I don't know much about. The assumption is scoring goals means you're a better player, which is a false assumption, okay? Because, like, for example, Zinedine Zidane. Compare him with somebody who came after him, you know, who scores as many goals as he, no one's going to argue that, what's his name, Bellingham, what's the guy called? Bellingham.
Jude Bellingham.
Jude Bellingham. No one's going to argue, I mean, some people are stupid enough to argue, but that Bellingham is the same as level as Zidane, even though maybe they've scored the same amount of goals. Zidane was controlling the midfield in a manner, in a way that there's no way Bellingham, even if he has 2 lifetimes, will be able to achieve this kind of mastery of the ball. And most of the specialists and football commentators and players that he's played with say that, you know, when Zidane had the ball, he was floating like a ballerina, and, you know, skating on ice. It was the aesthetics of it. And don't forget, he did take France to a World Cup final, even though he got the red card. But he took them there. So you can make an argument. But what I'm trying to say is, you can make an argument either way. Find your arguments, your strongest arguments, and then your strategy, and then put your tactics together. Okay, so you can make this with essentially anything you want to debate. So I think we should pause here, okay? And would you want to talk about football? Or do you want to talk about religion? Do you want to go into a religious topic?
Let's go religion.
You want to go religious topic? Okay, so we can do a typical religious debate, since we've already kind of covered with Shamir some of the fine-tuning arguments and stuff like that. Let's go atheism versus Islam again. And I want you, as if you are planning a debate. Actually, how many is it? Yeah, so two of you. I think if 2 of you do atheism and 3 of you do Islam, so you're going to debate each other a little bit, okay? But you have to have just one strong argument. Forget about 3. We haven't got time for that. Just one strong argument. And the question at hand is atheism or Islam, yeah? Or Islam, and then sub-question, which is a better explanation of reality? Okay, so you have to prepare one strong argument. Then you have to also have in mind that you're going to respond to one of their strong arguments, and you have to have a strategy and tactics that you employ. It's going to be, I'll say, give you 2 minutes each. 2 minutes each to speak. Yeah, so everyone here is going to speak. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, so it's going to be 10 minutes of speaking, and 2 minutes to respond. 1 minute to respond. 1 minute to respond. So it should be 15 minutes overall, the whole exercise. So what I'll do here is give you 5 minutes first to prepare and speak to the person next to you in your team. And then after that, we'll make it into an interactive session. Okay. Is that all right?
You want to pick the teams or?
Yeah, I said those 2 and those 3, right?
The atheists.
Yeah. What do you think?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.